This is part 3 of my autobiography, Just Do You, which is my journey from madness to Zen. Leading up to recording this part of the book, I was a bit nervous because part of it is very racy, so I have made the decision to take that out. It's only a very small portion of it, and it's to do with my time in adult entertainment. I feel if I read it, YouTube would take it down, but you will definitely get the gist of it by all the other content that surrounds it. So with that, let's get started. Chapter 14, Blow After Blow. I was 19 when my mother had her car accident. She was coming around the corner, her car slipped on the road, and she crashed into a power pole. I was told she died twice in the chopper ride to the hospital. I remember getting a call several months later saying that she was talking again. I hung up the phone and immediately left for the hospital. She was trying to talk to me and tell me 100 things all at once, but I made out the only 4 words I desperately wanted to hear, and that was, "I love you, Jacqui." My relationship with Mum had always been one of dependency, on my part at least, as it is with most children and their parents. Her car accident pulled the rug out beneath my feet. It felt foreign turning to my aunties and uncles because we'd grown up independent from most of them, and my relationship with my grandfather was completely non-existent. Throughout my childhood, my observation of him led me to believe that he didn't want anything to do with us. So it was incredibly confusing having him show up at the hospital like a kid. What I did remember of him was how tall he was and how stern and uninterested he was in my presence. Yet in all of that, I still had so much respect for him. My gauge as far as identifying healthy male role models was shit at the best of times. My older brother and I had moved away from home before the car accident, but my little brother and sister were still living at home. Events like this, no matter how good everyone's intentions are, can leave lifelong scars, and did, on us all. Not long after that, my stepdad, somewhat estranged from me at the time, had a stroke, and in one night everything changed for him and was another severe and devastating blow for my younger brother and sister. And although still with us, we mourned for our not-so-gentle giant. Chapter 15, Surface Sex. 21 brought purpose. There were things that I was good at and I wanted to show the world. There had to be a light for me out there, and damned if I was going to miss out. I hit the pavement and found work. When I was 8, I visited with a woman called Caroline. She had a different type of dwarfism than me, but she was little person nonetheless. She worked in a tall building in the middle of Auckland, but I don't remember what it was that she did. I do remember how in awe I was of her, not only because she had a big person job in the big person world, which is how I saw it back then, but she was gorgeous and well-spoken and poised. She was always well-dressed in her work suits, and she always wore vibrantly bright-coloured lipstick. She had petite long fingers that were adorned with dazzling jewels and perfectly manicured nails that I noticed usually matched her lipstick. Caroline and Mum hit it off immediately, and she gently tucked me under her wing in all things little. I had attended the Little People's conferences up until I was about 13, the awkward years. I had made some wonderful friends at our yearly meetings, but as the years went by, attending often brought some conflict. From as far back as I remember, I'd spent every minute of every day trying to be someone beyond just my stature, and attending these Little People weekends dragged me back into it. It isn't like that for everyone. For many, the Little People's conferences are a huge blessing, and so it should be, but I know I wasn't alone in my struggle for normaldom. I now attend the odd meeting, and again in adulthood, I have met some amazing, wonderful, beautiful little people, and am grateful for the reconnection. So I got excited about finding my niche and achieving in the business world. It was new for me to get up in the morning and go and do something that I was good at. I enjoyed it. I was proud of myself. I met some great people and immersed myself in the city. Yet the thing about unresolved past pain is that no matter how happy you feel, it is tirelessly lurking in the corners, waiting for you to lose your footing, stumble and fall. While working for a rental company, I met an intriguing, mischievous woman. We got to talking about her occupation, and she shared with me that she was in the adult entertainment industry. She said that she made a great living, and with my voice, I could rake in the money. So a few months later, when I found myself redundant, I called her. Within 2 weeks, I was hired as a phone sex operator and rebranded as Casey James. There is a stigma that goes with this type of work, in that the people in the industry are generally coined as largely undesirable, and for the most part, it's true. But it was definitely all made up for in character. There was never a dull moment. It was run like any business. We had offices and desks and comfy chairs, and we'd sit in front of screens entertaining men and women from time to time. We also had headsets that had mute buttons that we renamed laugh buttons, because every time we hit them it would be to laugh uncontrollably at our sometimes creative and often hilarious callers. These girls became like family to me, and I loved and connected with most of them on some level. One woman in particular, the one that got me into all of this, would take me under her wing and protect me from the vultures. It didn't take long for most of us to fall into the trap of blinding fantasy. While I was there, I witnessed some pretty dark stuff. The industry attracted an underground evil that I previously never knew existed. Most of us crossed lines from the professional to the personal when it came to the job. I feel I made clever, calculated decisions, but in all honesty, I was just bloody lucky. At that time of my life, most encounters of the male kind were initiated over the phone. The girls and I thought we were experts at picking out the good-looking men from the not-so-desirable ones, just by listening to their voices, and we often got it right. There were also times when we got it tragically wrong, and the same could be said from their point of view as well, I'm sure. Both parties would have some kind of predetermined idea of what the other would look like, and that was based on the information that was divulged in the conversations leading up to the meeting. We were often very comfortable with describing the positive physical attributes we both had, but often left out the things that were not so attractive. One could consider omitting the full truth as deception, and others would consider the opposite party's reaction to an unprepared truth as a judgment on their character. If they couldn't get past the flaws, then they weren't who they thought they were. I rarely disclosed my height. I figured that if they reacted negatively, it was on them, in which case it would mean they were not the one. I would eventually shrug off the rejection with a joke about how I was blessed to be little because it weeds out the assholes. Upon reflection, I know that omitting that truth was through fear of immediate rejection and a belief that if I just got them in front of me, I could dazzle them with everything I was beyond my stature, and I often did. Unfortunately, connections created through deception are never long-lasting. Eventually, all that was once mysterious and endearing would be revealed as insecurity laced with unworthiness. Aside from the disappointing and dark sides of the job, there was so much fun to be had. We partied like there was no tomorrow and revelled in the endless smorgasbord of men that seemed to turn up out of nowhere. I was already an actress in life, and that year would be one of my most daring performances. I learnt everything there was to know about surface sex, sex without emotion, and in the rare moments of solitude, I would transfer my life onto paper and later share those stories over the phone with Casey's clients. While I was having the time of my life on the outside, my core was festering, drowning, and suffocating. I felt pain calling me, and my efforts to silence it with my 21 vices had me so that I was only able to tread water. When drugs and booze wasn't enough, I turned to sex and soon embarked on a 3-year bender of promiscuity where I would welcome rejection, abuse, and violation. It didn't matter how badly these men treated me. It would be nothing compared to the internal practice of self-loathing I had become accustomed to. I didn't deserve love, so I settled for lust. Chapter 16, Against the Rail. I lived right in the middle of the city on the 11th floor. It wasn't the best view, but it was high enough to feel the force of the wind at a height. I remember coming home defeated after a very heavy night out. I was alone and had too much to drink. I went outside onto the balcony for a cigarette. Already agitated, I became more so when the lighter refused to light, so I screamed and threw it over the side of the balcony. As soon as I let it go, I ran to the edge, hoping to see it splinter into pieces on the floor below. And in the darkness, wild wind whipping at my hair, my chest pressing hard against the cold steel rail and peering down from 11 floors up, I got to thinking what it would feel like to fall. Poem, Not of This World. I am not of this world, a world that has evolved into untruths and falsehoods, a world where anxiety and ego runs rampant. What soul would knowingly enlist in such chaos and destruction? A resilient soul, one that brings hope, love, and ease of suffering where she can. A soul that refuses to surrender, even when she is screaming for mercy. Chapter 17, Giving Birth to Justice. I fell pregnant just after my 25th birthday, and even though I knew the circumstances weren't ideal, nothing I had experienced in my whole life had ever felt more right. So I wrapped a warm blanket around me and my small swollen belly and went into hiding. My son's father was and is a gentle soul. He was a security guard and worked as a doorman at many of the clubs we frequented at the time. He was 6 feet 3 inches tall and towered high above me. Ours was a sexual attraction, and it took us less than 6 weeks to realize we had absolutely nothing in common, so it ended shortly after. The nail in the coffin was his admission that he was still in a relationship with his estranged wife and had 5 other children. 6 weeks after we parted, I went to the doctor's to get an injection. That way, any of my adventures wouldn't end up in a pregnancy, only to find out that I already was pregnant. Mum had recovered considerably since her car accident, and even though she required a lot of support, she was still my pillar of strength. She was the first to know, and her immediate response came from a place that only a grandmother can truly understand. "Jacqui, you're going to keep our baby this time, eh?" To which I replied, "Yes, Mum, I'm going to keep our baby this time." At that time, I lived in an old mansion on Mission Bay with 8 other lively souls. They were either artists, bar managers, musicians, or larger-than-life characters hungry for their calling. I am sure I can speak for all of us when I say that it was the most amazing time of our youths. We had access to any kind of drug, drink, bar, and entertainment available at the time, and we made the most of it. We were a family of teenagers and young adults on a journey of self-discovery. We celebrated with wild abandon in good times and rocked each other to sleep in bad times. Music, laughter, and light-hearted banter filled the house with intermittent undertones of cannabis. I lived in the basement. It was outside and down the stairs. You wouldn't have known it was the basement by the way that I had dressed it up in drapes and tarpa cloths, rugs, and other character pieces. When we weren't hanging over a bucket upstairs in the wash house, we were partaking in the basement under a cloud of pungent smoke. We would play our favourite songs and perform them with vigour until we erupted like a pack of red-eyed hyena, rolling around holding onto our bellies and laughter on the floor. Falling pregnant changed everything. The dynamic was lost, and activities I once encouraged I now found literally nauseating and intolerable. At one stage I was called overly self-righteous, in which I agreed and staunchly made no apologies for. Eventually I realized that I was being unfair. They had every right to continue their journey as they saw fit, and although my mansion family wanted me to stay, I knew I needed to go out on my own and grow my baby. I wasn't going to tell my son's father I was pregnant. I remember saying to a friend, "I didn't grow up with a dad," to which he responded, "Yeah, but this isn't about you, eh?" I called him that afternoon, and to my surprise, he was more than accepting of the news. It was at least a relief to know where he was, and that we could possibly be friends. My pregnancy was predicted to be a very painful and trying experience, but the first 8 months were the most pain-free months of my life. A woman's body often becomes supple and forgiving moving through her pregnancy, and that was true for me. There was no real way of knowing if my baby was going to be a little person or not, so it was a waiting game. I was monitored more often than most, and for the first 6 months he was growing perfectly with no signs of stopping. But on the 7th month his growth rate plateaued, and they advised it could either be textbook growth pause or there was always a chance he would be little. I went home and cried, but to be fair, I cried the whole time throughout my pregnancy. Those overactive hormones are not for the faint-hearted. My younger sister had already had her first child before I fell pregnant and was on to her second, so we were both pregnant at the same time. She has a no-nonsense way about her that is cool and calm. She often diffuses my internal thunderstorms like no other. There was no doubt in my mind that I would be a great mother and that my child's physicality held no bearing on the way that I would love him, but her reassurance went a long way. She went about it with the attitude that he was already going to be a little person, and that gave it a sense of normality. We got prepared to support and raise our unique blessing with as much love and devotion as we could muster. It was unanimous among my close friends and family that there could be no other more qualified person to raise a little person than me, and I found great comfort in their confidence. Toward the end of the 7 months, I began to show real signs of discomfort, signs I could not ignore anymore, and I could sense we were both in distress. I was admitted into Green Lane Hospital shortly after. The doctor who was appointed to me on the day of delivery was a wonderful man. He asked if I wanted to try a natural birth, but with the obvious irregulations in my hips and pelvis, it was ruled out. With the help of an amazingly skilled and enthusiastic team and a dear friend who had flown all the way back from London to support us, we delivered my beautiful baby boy into the world. Justice was 6 weeks early and had no sign of littleness, and aside from the newborn fatigue, he was a healthy baby boy. I kissed his pouty new lips before they whisked him away into the NICU. Deliriously, and while they were still sewing me up, I sat up on my forearms and said, "Is that it?" feeling surprised with how smoothly the procedure had gone, and then I added, "Do I just go and feed him now?" They all laughed and were delighted to have been part of our experience. The days that followed were trying. That's when shit got real. Justice was in an incubator for 2 days after I gave birth to him, and not entirely because he had to be. I was scared. I didn't think I was going to be able to hold him and feed him properly. I didn't want people to see me fail and doubt my abilities as a mother. My fear ate me alive for 2 days while friends and family passed through the hospital. There were streams of support and love pouring in. My stepfather came to visit, even though we hadn't seen each other for a while. He was sporting a cane that he had acquired since his stroke. He came and sat next to me in my bed after visiting with Justice. I was waiting for someone to say it, and sure enough, like any dad, he said what he had to say. "That boy needs his mum, honey." The next morning, I called for an orderly. The staff on the ward knew that I'd been procrastinating, and there was an air of concern among them. They were relieved to see me hoist myself into a wheelchair and be whisked away to the NICU. I cried as they awkwardly placed him into my arms. He was so tiny and vulnerable. I hadn't held him for 2 days. My heart melted as he nuzzled into me, and that day, with the absence of pressure, advice, and observation, I learnt how to feed him and change him and hold him in my arms my way, and I have never let him go. Chapter 18, Mad Mother. Justice was moved up to my ward, and I relied on the ward staff to steer me in the right direction. He was quiet as many newborns are and slept soundly most of the time. While he was asleep, I went to bathe myself. When I returned, I found Justice choking and almost blue. Screaming at the top of my lungs, I grabbed the bell and pushed it. I don't know how many times, but I pushed it and pushed it. Several staff members came running into the room and immediately began clearing his airway. All I remember saying was, "Help my baby, help my baby." It would happen a few more times that day, and every time it happened, fear and self-doubt crept its way deeper and deeper into my psyche. I stopped sleeping properly, and when I did manage to sleep, I would wake up startled, needing to check that he was still breathing. When friends and family came, they would promise to watch him while I slept, but it didn't help. I feared I would wake up and find my baby dead. I would think it, dream it, and imagine it until I refused to leave the hospital. I wanted to stay there forever. Mum did her best to be there for me, but was still finding her own feet. My auntie stayed with me day and night and was my security blanket at the time. As our discharge date drew nearer, we decided that I would stay with her in Thames. So my auntie packed us up and took us home. There I was able to rest and heal and build back the confidence I knew I had inside me as a mother. She made sure we had everything we needed, and when the day came for us to leave, I cried. Me and my baby boy were about to face the world alone, and although the tears flowed heavily as we pulled out of her driveway, I knew that I was ready to go it alone. I was lucky enough to be awarded a grant that would buy my first car. The day I drove it away was one of the most freeing moments of my life. I had always been independent at heart, but now I could go and do whatever I wanted without the assistance of others. The following morning, Justice and I drove to the beach. I would steal glimpses of him in the rearview mirror from time to time and felt elated by what I had accomplished. I pulled up at the beach and carried him onto the small sand dunes. We watched the waves roll in and listened to them crash as seagulls called out through the wind. I held on to Justice tightly and watched as he intermittently opened his little eyes and bared witness to the first of many adventures. Time flew by fast, and every challenge we faced, we overcame. I found life as a single mother a little trickier than most, but the only time I felt distressed was when I couldn't give my baby what he needed. I would feel frustrated when I was food shopping and couldn't reach the nappies or baby food, and anxious when attending doctor appointments and couldn't reach the door handle to get inside. But I sucked it up and I asked for help when I needed it. People in general are pretty generous, helpful, courteous creatures, and then there are some real dipshits. My sister and I took Justice out on a shopping trip. We'd been at it for a few hours, so I took him out in the pram to find a resting spot while my sister finished up. We were only there a few minutes before a lady came up and sat next to me. She quickly asked if this was my baby, to which I proudly replied yes. And before I knew it, she lifted up the baby blanket to inspect Justice to see whether or not he was a little person. I was so stunned that I couldn't get a word out. Then before she left, she placed her hand on my head and said, "You should be very proud of yourself for making him." My sister had walked out of the shop and saw straight away that something wasn't right with me. She came over and sat down next to me and said, "What the fuck happened?" I still couldn't get my head around the invasion of privacy, and I just said, "I don't know." By the time I was able to put words together, the lady had long gone, and that is probably the only reason why she stands today. Motherhood came with responsibility and purpose, and I loved my boy with a passion. I was naive to think that having a child would be the part of a story where a mad woman turns zen. And although the love that I have for my son is what kept my head above water, my past pain was never too far away. I revelled in the peace that I found caring for someone else. It was like a holiday from my own mad existence, but it would take only a year for the seductive sounds of alcohol to call me again. 18 months is all it took before I surrendered to the urge to party again. The need for numbing had returned, and with it brought wingmen, cigarettes, and marijuana obediently in tow. It would be 5 years before I let a man touch me again. I made it okay to do these things because I felt that I was keeping my son away from them, but mostly by convincing myself that he didn't see it and it wouldn't affect him. I knew even then that I was in denial, and if it wasn't for my incessant voices in my head and my desperation for avoidance, guilt may have been enough to make me stop, but at that time, it wasn't. Chapter 19, Special Me. Justice started school in 2007, which came far too soon for me. I was dreading it. Most parents are nervous for their children when they start school. We want to make sure that they have friends and fit in with all the other children. We worry about whether or not they'll find their lunch or be able to open their lunchbox, whether they stubbed their toes and someone was there to wipe their tears. Parents with uniqueness or parents with children who have uniqueness have an added angst to consider. I was beside myself wondering if Justice was happy and making friends. Not only did he have to be himself, he also had to be a kid with a little mum, and let's face it, most 5-year-olds have little or no filter, let alone a politically correct vocabulary. Children would eyeball us all the way to the classroom and then all the way back to the car, all the while probing and asking a million questions. I did my best to answer all of the questions, but it was Justice who had to vet all the unanswered queries in the playground, or while he was in class trying to concentrate on his lessons. Some of them could be really cruel. I felt so responsible for the distraction and for his growing anxiety. I searched in anguish until I found a possible solution. Then I rang his school and asked if they would be happy for me to speak to some of their classes about difference and how to approach uniqueness politely. We were fortunate enough to have a very supportive school and head of staff. Not even a week later, I had 6 classrooms lined up for my talk. I knew what I wanted to say, but I wasn't sure if they would be receptive to my message. When I walked into the classroom for the first time, the children would often go into a frenzy, chattering amongst themselves, trying to determine what was standing before them. Generally, the teacher would quieten them down, introduce me, and then give me the floor. It was never a problem to get their attention or convince them to fix all eyes on me because they were glued to me from the get-go. I would start by telling them about myself. My name is Jacqui and I am a mum. I have brothers and sisters. I have a mum and a dad. I have a job. I drive a car and I look after my home. I cook and clean and do the shopping like any other mum does, but there is something a little different about me. Raise your hand if you think you know what it is. Children were a little wary at start because in life we are often scolded for calling people names. Yet here I was, encouraging them in an effort to get everything out on the table, which was a new concept for them. I knew in order to gain their trust I had to be vulnerable, and that was a huge step for me. And soon enough, after a few brave souls had come forward with answers, others followed. Some of them came up with the traditional labels such as dwarf, midget, and a short person or small person, and some would get more creative and suggest I might be a fairy or a creature out of a movie. To be honest, I liked what they came up with. The word dwarf and midget had never sat well with me, but I grew accustomed to hearing it over and over again in a forum that I was mostly in control of. I was becoming more comfortable with the words that in the past would have had me diving for cover. I was healing while I was teaching. I would explain to the children that they were right. There are many words that can describe my physical difference, but that there was a particular word that I preferred. I like to be called a little person because I am little and I am a person like everyone else. I would then go on to tell them that there is something else I like to be called more than any other name, and that is Jacqui. I went on to say that Jacqui was the name my mum had given me, and it meant that I was more than just what I looked like. It was my gifted name and embraced all of the other wonderful things that I can be too. What I hadn't anticipated was how forthcoming the children were once they got past my appearance. They wanted to know everything about me. They asked if they could see my car, and some would ask if they could touch me. At one of my talks, I noticed a little girl in the front row. She was quite close to me, but had kept quiet throughout the whole talk. Instead, she had slowly inched her way closer to my feet before reaching her small hand out to touch them. I stopped talking for a moment to look down at her, and we both shared a really special smile that I'll never ever forget. By the end of the day, and after all the positive feedback I received from the staff, I knew I couldn't stop there. I started ringing other schools and discussing with them my seminars. Within days, I had schools booked all over Auckland, and that is how Special Me was born. The more I spoke, the more confident I got, and the more I noticed how my Special Me talks were breaking barriers. Soon I'd gained the confidence to push a little further, and I would ask if anybody else in the room felt that they had a uniqueness. Eventually one would answer, and then another, and another. Children would put up their hands and speak of the differences they felt that they had. Some of them talked about the colour of their skin or ethnicity. Some spoke about having hearing aids or wearing glasses. Or they'd share a story about their brother or sister who might be in a wheelchair. Seeing children for the first time put up their hands and openly declare that they have a difference, instead of hiding away from the world, proved what I was doing was empowering them with confidence and pride. These days still, after many visits to many schools, I am in awe of their courage and always leave feeling as if though I have done something good. I don't know if bringing my uniqueness to the forefront was the right thing to do for justice. Sometimes I wonder if my project had an adverse effect, whether I overshadowed him, and I question whether or not putting myself out there was the right idea. However, what I do know for sure is that no one is going to benefit from me hiding away. Either way, we are here now doing great things, and when I visit the schools with justice, after the children are done with me, they flock to him, and I couldn't be prouder of the young man he is becoming. When I was young, my mum told me that I would be a teacher of sorts, maybe not in the traditional way, but indirectly. At the time, I felt reluctant and resented my position because it meant shining a light on all of my insecurities. These days, I give my time and heart freely to anyone who has a genuine respect and interest in my message, to celebrate our unique selves. It is one of my passions and continues to feed my soul. Chapter 20, The Douche Zone. Through my experience with speaking and my journey with Special Me, I've perfected and refined some of my earlier tools and personal guidelines that now work really well in difficult situations. When people would react to my uniqueness insensitively or thoughtlessly, it felt like someone had ripped my heart out and stomped it into the earth. For years, especially teenage years, we can shy away from opportunities in life just to avoid embarrassing and painful situations. Unfortunately, we will always encounter people that test our character. The good news is that we can learn the power of reaction, which can take a spotlight off us and put it back on them and their behavior. Growing up with uniqueness, we develop radars. It goes off when we sense a possible uncomfortable situation or difficult person. Mostly, that triggers a sense of anxiety or nervousness. When our characters are so directly and abruptly challenged, we can often find ourselves responding harshly or running for cover. This is so very normal, and until we develop skills to deal with these situations better, we should not beat ourselves up for it. However, long term and for our own quality of life, we deserve better than that. At 38 years old, my radar is very well tuned in the douche zone. So much so that I know who I will and will not engage with almost immediately by the way that people react to my uniqueness and or their body language. It took me years to perfect the radar, but ultimately it is about using your intuition. This is good news to everyone because we all have a sense of intuition inbuilt from a very young age, and with experience and training, it enables us to better react to challenging situations and people. Evaluating people in the douche zone. This is really important because the way you react to a child that has challenged your character is quite different to the way you'd react to an adult. Also, the nature of the challenge determines your response too. The following examples show how I evaluate my reactions to deal with different people at different ages. With toddlers, I don't react. I smile warmly and get on with my day. They are toddlers. When a toddler says something, it's usually not them that's embarrassed you. It's more the fact that people are looking at you, wondering how you're going to respond to it. From the mouths of babes, terrifying things can be said. But sometimes I find a little one saying, "You're a little mum," and I say, "I sure am." With children, if they are asking a question, I put my teaching hat on, and with a voice that commands respect, I answer their questions the best I can. If they are rude, I put my authoritative voice on and say, "I don't mind you asking me questions, but you're not to be rude." This tends to work wonders. If they continue to be nasty and rude, I look for their adult, because that's where it's at. And 99.9% of the time, the parents are horrified. If a child is nasty and continues, I just tell them to bugger off, that they're yuck, and I'm going to play with people who are kind to me. And usually that fixes it, because a kid's currency is good times, and I'm good at having those. And always, 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 I welcome kids back, because they're kids. Teenagers. I'm pretty straightforward with teenagers when they're rude. They'll either get the picture and snap out of it, or they will feel they have a challenge and look cool and carry on. That doesn't really happen to me too often, because teenagers are more about having fun than causing trouble in my experience. But on the odd occasion, when a teenager continues to push my buttons, I'm pretty clear and disengage like they don't exist. With them, I don't have an ego, and I don't have a desire to win a battle. Usually I say my piece, get a point or two in, and then brush them off. If this is their general behaviour to people who have differences, their problems are many and none of mine. In my experience, more often than not, one of their friends pipes up and stops their friend from being an absolute dick. And to me, that young person becomes the coolest kid in town. Adults. I am pretty blunt with adults, as they should know better. I cut them off pretty fast. The challenge with them is it's sometimes hard to gauge their intention. Sometimes they're just being genuinely curious, and sometimes they're just being intrusive. But the bottom line is, it has nothing to do with their intention. It's more about how their questions make me feel. If I'm unsure or feeling challenged, I have learnt to tell them that they are asking personal questions and that I don't like discussing it with them. However, if they make the effort to come up to me quietly and respectfully and they ask a few questions, then I'm all in, because respect has been initiated. Some adults think they're funny by making remarks like, "Did you get into the Hobbit movie?" which for some reason they think that they're marvellously hilarious. And this is when I get to eye-rolling them and don't give them a whole lot more than that. I just stop engaging, but I also don't try and make them feel bad. They just lack awareness. And you never know when somebody's unfiltered mouth is actually them trying to navigate their own condition. But I assure you that there have been some shocking experiences. Like when adults grab their children and point out the dwarf in the supermarket so that they can laugh at me together. That, my friends, is something else. And still, 15 years later, my response to that is a look of complete and utter disgust. When people are completely vile, I'll fill the room with fire until they're ash. It's definitely not the best reaction, and me and God are working on that. But hey, who isn't working on something? And that, my friends, brings us to the drunken douche zone. These challenges are rampant in this environment. I have spent my life in a social scene, and for me it is a simple formula. Pick my fights wisely. Have some good, fun, trustworthy friends around you, and have a thick skin and don't sweat the small stuff. Focus on all the amazing people that this world has to offer you, and the amazing experiences that are there to help you grow into strong, confident, and powerful contributing members of society. Walk away from negative and expose yourself to all the things positive. Confidence is knowledge, and knowledge is learning from mistakes and victories. Embrace who you are, love life hard, and have no regrets. I'll see you all back here soon for part 4.